Welcome to
Crazy, right?
A podcast
Be your own person.
for those affected by
Crazy, right?
mental health,
I wanted to just try it.
Crazy,
It's something that I've struggled with for a while.
featuring live improvised music
Now I finally got my head around again.
by your host,
am I right? Crazy,
It feels good to talk about it.
right? Crazy, right?
Dave Asher.
My guest today is Alexandria Springer. She is a 30-year-old living in Chicago who was diagnosed with depression and anxiety in 2012. She is a facilitator with the Depression Bipolar Support Alliance support group, also known as DBSA. Alexandria, thanks for joining me here today in my studio. I'm going to step over here to my piano. What's the first thing that comes into your mind, a word or a sound, just based on anything that you're hearing? Maybe something that starts with the letter F.
Freedom.
Do you feel like your mental health situation hinders your freedom in life?
When I wasn't talking about it, I didn't feel as free. It felt inhibiting, and I think connecting with other people that are also struggling and being more out about it myself has been very freeing.
What inspired you or began that process of coming out about it?
I came from a family where we were told to not talk about things and to not air out our dirty laundry, as it were. So I think I reflected on how that was really not working. I think it just felt oppressive, and these other types of like liberal open ideals were touted, like equality and social justice, but in terms of feeling, it wasn't really. It was also a household defined by addiction. It was kind of that elephant constantly in the room, always on radar, but you couldn't really articulate it. I didn't even call my mom an alcoholic or that she had a drinking problem until I was much older, because it was a shame. There's a lot of shame. And I think it's shame I still deal with now, and why talking about it is so appealing.
You were ashamed of getting emotional.
Yeah, the fact that I had feelings and that I wasn't able to suck it up, as it were. Times like, say, when I lost someone that I was close with. He passed away when he was 16, and I was talking to my mom about it, and she said, well, I'd had something similar when I was your age, and I just dealt with it. Because that's what she grew up with, in this 50s household. And even though I know she'd been suicidal, and she'd had a lot of these serious things, but my grandma was an alcoholic, and they told my mom that if she couldn't deal with how things were, she should just move out. The beauty in coming to vulnerability, and what that actually looks like. It so often gets equated with weakness, but if you look at vulnerability as kind of the door into another person's existence and hopefully a shared experience you might have with them, that vulnerability is kind of the doorway for connection. And things I've been vulnerable about, whether it's my own struggles with my family, it's made some of the strongest bonds that I've ever known in my life. I can't think of any stronger drug, as it were. When you do have connection that really benefits you, there's nothing stronger. There's no better medicine. I used to always joke that men were my drug, because I use them every way I can think, every different manifestation of relationship. I'm about 6 months out from a 5-year relationship that, as much as it was defined by a lot of love, there was, I think he was not able to be present emotionally, and he was committed in many other ways, but seemed to be very uncomfortable with disclosure of emotion or feeling. I noticed that the first month and we were dating, and as important as vulnerability is to me, you'd think I would have said that's a red flag. Again, the shame. I think I shamed myself for feeling like I wanted to keep talking about things, and I wanted to get to know him in a deep way. Shouldn't the basic stuff just be enough? And it wasn't for me. And turns out after 5 years, it's still not enough. So definitely being drawn to people that are withholding in some way, especially emotionally. I'm sure it's, it's familiar. It's that familiar demon, unfortunately, as much as it, may be painful. And I've been in romantic situations before where I think I really feel seen and that person gives me back the same vulnerability, and it's almost uncomfortable. But the more I start to, examine that, it's like, well, why am I uncomfortable by people that are there for me, that are able to give back the same energy and feedback that I give them? I think just because it's foreign, especially from men, men that are vulnerable are not as common as I like. But it's almost like in culture, it doesn't seem we give that space. But I think it's so necessary for everyone to be given the space to be vulnerable in whatever way they need to be.
Can you recall the first depressive episode you had?
Yeah, so the first one I was 16. The person who was my first kiss, who I was romantically involved with at the time, died in a car crash. I was getting close to the end of high school and discovering myself. I just thought it was intense grief. And I think in many ways it was, but the intensity with which I felt the downs seemed a bit different. And the second time it happened, I was 19, and my mom had this stroke and lost her memory. So that was also a depression, but again, linked to grief. So I think the time I really had a major depression that was, I would say, totally chemical was 3 years ago. And I kept looking for something to blame, like, oh, I don't have this significant loss, like, what is this? And until I was medicated and was responsive to it, I didn't make the connection that I was really depressed. I thought I was just someone that had gone through some grief.
Did you sense a different mindset or manifestation of the depression when it was triggered by grief or loss versus when it was, you might say, untriggered?
Yeah, because I think when it was connected to grief, it felt like there was maybe more of a rhyme or reason for it, or it felt fitting, and so I feel like in a way I was able to give myself more grace and compassion. But when it was just chemical and not necessarily triggered by a grief loss, it was harder to be nice to myself because I just kept saying I shouldn't feel this way.
And your father, how did he respond to these episodes that you were in?
I told him, Dad, I'm going to go to therapy. I'm going to start going to a support group. And he said, well, you can talk to me and your brother. Life's a bitch. My dad died when I was 15. That's just how it is. You don't need to talk to anyone about it. You don't need to talk to strangers. You don't need to air out your dirty laundry.
How do you feel about that now?
I understand that it came from a place of what he knew, but it didn't make it any less painful. And there's a reason why that quote is so burned in my mind, because life's a bitch. Everybody knows life's a bitch, but you don't want to feel like you can't really talk to anybody about that, not in an important way.
What do you think could be accomplished in this country or generally or in people's lives if talking about mental health were destigmatized?
Oh, I think it would be a revolution. I think in my mind it would change the world. It's in part why I'm interested in going into social work. It's why I'm active in a support group and keep coming back and sharing my experiences, even though a lot of people would look at me and say, well, you don't really need help for that anymore, do you? You kind of have it together. You hold down a job. You have a roof over your head. But I think the beauty of sharing and that vulnerability is that it gives light to other people that are in a dark place. This idea that if that person survived, maybe I can too. It's okay to feel whatever you feel, and it's okay to cry, and you're valid. and your feelings and your sensations matter, and you're not wrong.
You're a member of a support group.
Mm-hmm.
Do you follow along with the other people in the group and notice how the group changes someone or changes their behavior in group or changes their outlook as you get to know them?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm one of the facilitators in the group I participate in, and I think there's something beautiful about taking on a role like that where you're kind of guiding the ship, you know? And I have to leverage my own darkness, certainly, to let them know, everybody know that, like, I'm one of you, and I'm, like, as well as I might be looking today, it doesn't change that I remember what it's like to be at the bottom of a rabbit hole and to feel like nothing's ever going to change. So you share that, and then you do start to see people change. They just attempt different ways of looking at things or try communicating with someone in a different way, and it's a slow progress, but it's there.
So it sounds like, for example, when someone new comes to the group, you identify with being at that part of your journey as well?
Completely. And that's the part that makes it so easy to empathize with anyone that walks in the door, because as far removed as I might feel from that version of myself 3 years ago, I can recall it like it was yesterday. So as much as they might be presenting in ways that are confusing or a bit off-putting, I remember the first couple months I came, I would cry hysterically every time, to the point where you couldn't even understand what I was saying. And there's something about looking around at the faces of people in a group of, you don't know anyone, you know, and to see them all nodding their heads along in agreement, and you don't have to explain why you feel what you feel or how you see things. They just get it. And I never experienced that in my life anywhere. And I want to pass that gift on to other people.
Thanks so much for this.
Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you again to my guest, Alexandria Springer. She can be found on Instagram at Alejandra_on_fire or at Chicago rock concerts or feminist book signings. Learn more about DBSA and support groups near you at www.dbsalliance.org. All the best. That wraps up this episode of Crazy Right with Dave Asher. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please consider writing a review or rating this podcast, and of course, we would love it if you subscribe. I'm Dave Asher, and I'm glad to be here.